Chapter 8. The Right and the Left Side Awareness. Our discussion of dreaming was most helpful to us, not only because it solved our impasse in dreaming together, but because it brought its concepts to an intellectual level. Talking about it kept us busy. It allowed us to have a moment's pause in order to ease our agitation. One night, while I was out running an errand, I called La Gorda from a telephone booth. She told me that she had been in a department store and had had the sensation that I was hiding there, behind some mannequins on display. She was certain I was teasing her and became furious with me. She rushed through the store trying to catch me, to show me how angry she was. Then she realized that she was actually remembering something she had done quite often around me, having a tantrum. In unison, we arrived then at the conclusion that it was time to try again our dreaming together. As we talked, we felt a renewed optimism. I went home immediately. I very easily entered into the first state, restful vigil. I had a sensation of bodily pleasure, a tingling radiating from my solar plexus, which was transformed into the thought that we were going to have great results. That thought turned into a nervous anticipation. I became aware that my thoughts were emanating from the tingling in the middle of my chest. The instant I turned my attention to it, however, the tingling stopped. It was like an electric current that I could switch on and off. The tingling began again, even more pronounced than before. And suddenly I found myself face to face with La Gorda. It was as if I had turned a corner and bumped into her. I became immersed in watching her. She was so absolutely real, so herself, that I had the urge to touch her. The most pure, unearthly affection for her burst out of me at that moment. I began to sob uncontrollably. La Gorda quickly tried to interlock our arms to stop my indulging, but she could not move at all. We looked around. There was no fixed tableau in front of our eyes, no static picture of any sort. I had a sudden insight and told La Gorda that it was because we had been watching each other that we had missed the appearance of the dreaming scene. Only after I had spoken did I realize that we were in a new situation. The sound of my voice scared me. It was a strange voice, harsh, unappealing. It gave me a feeling of physical revulsion. La Gorda replied that we had not missed anything, that our second attention had been caught by something else. She smiled and made a puckering gesture with her mouth, a mixture of surprise and annoyance at the sound of her own voice. I found the novelty of talking and dreaming spellbinding, for we were not dreaming of a scene in which we talked. We were actually conversing. And it required a unique effort, quite similar to my initial effort of walking down a stairway in dreaming. I asked her whether she thought my voice sounded funny. She nodded and laughed out loud. The sound of her laughter was shocking. I remembered that Don Gennaro used to make the strangest and most frightening noises. La Gorda's laughter was in the same category. The realization struck me then that La Gorda and I had quite spontaneously entered into our dreaming bodies. I wanted to hold her hand. I tried, but I could not move my arm. Because I had some experience with moving in that state, I willed myself to go to La Gorda's side. My desire was to embrace her, but instead I moved in on her so close that we merged. I was aware of myself as an individual being, but at the same time I felt I was part of La Gorda. I liked that feeling immensely. We stayed merged until something broke our hold. I felt a command to examine the environment. As I looked, I clearly remembered having seen it before. We were surrounded by small, round mounds that looked exactly like sand dunes. They were all around us, in every direction, as far as we could see. They seemed to be made of something that looked like pale yellow sandstone or rough granules of sulfur. The sky was the same color and was very low and oppressive. There were banks of yellowish fog or some sort of yellow vapor that hung from certain spots in the sky. I noticed then that La Gorda and I seemed to be breathing normally. I could not feel my chest with my hands, but I was able to feel it expanding as I inhaled. The yellow vapors were obviously not harmful to us. We began to move in unison, slowly, cautiously, almost as if we were walking. After a short distance, I got very fatigued, and so did La Gorda. We were gliding just over the ground, and apparently moving that way was very tiring to our second attention. It required an inordinate degree of concentration. We were not deliberately mimicking our ordinary walk, but the effect was much the same as if we had been. To move required outbursts of energy, something like tiny explosions with pauses in between. We had no objective in our movement but moving itself. So finally, we had to stop. La Gorda spoke to me, her voice so faint that it was barely audible. She said that we were mindlessly going toward the heavier regions, and that if we kept on moving in that direction, the pressure would get so great that we would die. We automatically turned around and headed back in the same direction we had come from. But the feeling of fatigue did not let up. Both of us were so exhausted that we could no longer maintain our upright posture. We collapsed and quite spontaneously adopted the dreaming position. I woke up instantly in my study. La Gorda woke up in her bedroom. The first thing I told her upon awakening was that I had been in that barren landscape several times before. I had seen at least two aspects of it. One perfectly flat, the other covered with small sand dune-like mounds. As I was talking, I realized that I had not even bothered to confirm that we had had the same vision. I stopped and told her that I had gotten carried away by my own excitement. I had proceeded as if I were comparing notes with her about a vacation trip. It's too late for that kind of talk between us, she said with a sigh. But if it makes you happy, I'll tell you what we saw. She patiently described everything we had seen, said, and done. She added that she too had been in that deserted place before, and that she knew for a fact that it was a no man's land, the space between the world we know and the other world. It is the area between the parallel lines, she went on. We can go to it in dreaming, but in order to leave this world and reach the other, the one beyond the parallel lines, we have to go through that area with our whole bodies. I felt a chill at the thought of entering that barren place with our whole bodies. You and I have been there together, with our bodies, La Gorda went on. Don't you remember? I told her that all I could remember was seeing that landscape twice under Don Juan's guidance. Both times I had written off the experience because it had been brought about by the ingestion of hallucinogenic plants. Following the dictums of my intellect, I had regarded them as private visions and not as consensual experiences. I did not remember viewing that scene under any other circumstances. When did you and I get there with our bodies? I asked. I don't know, she said. The vague memory of it just popped into my mind when you mentioned being there before. I think that now it is your turn to help me finish what I have started to remember. I can't focus on it yet, but I do recall that Silvio Manuel took the Nahual woman, you and me, into that desolate place. I don't know why he took us in there, though. We were not in dreaming. I did not hear what else she was saying. My mind had begun to zero in on something still inarticulate. I struggled to set my thoughts in order. They rambled aimlessly. For a moment I felt as if I had reverted back years to a time when I could not stop my internal dialogue. Then the fog began to clear. My thoughts arranged themselves without any conscious direction, and the result was the full memory of an event which I had already partially recalled in one of those unstructured flashes of recollection that I used to have. La Gorda was right. We had been taken once to a region that Don Juan had called limbo, apparently drawing the term from religious dogma. I knew that La Gorda was also right in saying that we had not been in dreaming. On that occasion, at the request of Silvio Manuel, Don Juan had rounded up the Nahual woman, La Gorda, and myself. Don Juan told me that the reason for our meeting was the fact that, by my own means, but without knowing how, I had entered into a special recess of awareness, which was the site of the keenest form of attention. I had previously reached that state, which Don Juan had called the left side, but all too briefly, and always aided by him. One of its main features, the one that had the greatest value for all of us involved with Don Juan, was that in that state we were able to perceive a colossal bank of yellowish vapor, something which Don Juan called the wall of fog. Whenever I was capable of perceiving it, it was always to my right, extending forward to the horizon and up to infinity, thus dividing the world in two. The wall of fog would turn either to the right or to the left as I turned my head, so there was never a way for me to face it. On the day in question, both Don Juan and Silvio Manuel had talked to me about the wall of fog. I remembered that after Silvio Manuel had finished talking, he grabbed La Gorda by the nape of her neck, as if she were a kitten, and disappeared with her into the bank of fog. I had had a split second to observe their disappearance, because Don Juan had somehow succeeded in making me face the wall myself. He did not pick me up by the nape of the neck, but pushed me into the fog. And the next thing I knew, I was looking at the desolate plain. Don Juan, Silvio Manuel, the Nahual woman, and La Gorda were also there. I did not care what they were doing. I was concerned with the most unpleasant and threatening feeling of oppression, of fatigue, a maddening difficulty in breathing. I perceived that I was standing inside a suffocating, yellow, low-ceilinged cave. The physical sensation of pressure became so overwhelming that I could no longer breathe. It seemed that all my physical functions had stopped. I could not feel any part of my body. Yet I still could move, walk, extend my arms, rotate my head. I put my hands on my thighs. There was no feeling in my thighs, nor in the palms of my hands. My legs and arms were visibly there, but not palpably there. Moved by the boundless fear I was feeling, I grabbed the Nahual woman by the arm and yanked her off balance. But it was not my muscle strength that had pulled her. It was a force that was stored not in my muscles or skeletal frame, but in the very center of my body. Wanting to play that force once more, I grabbed La Gorda. She was rocked by the strength of my pull. Then I realized that the energy to move them had come from a stick-like protuberance that acted upon them as a tentacle. Protuberance. It was balanced at the midpoint of my body. All that had taken only an instant. The next moment I was back again at the same point of physical anguish and fear. I looked at Silvio Manuel in a silent plea for help. The way he returned my look convinced me that I was lost. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Don Juan turned his back to me, and I shook from the inside out with a physical terror beyond comprehension. I thought that the blood in my body was boiling, not because I felt heat, but because an internal pressure was mounting to the point of bursting. Don Juan commanded me to relax and abandon myself to my death. He said that I had to remain in there until I died, and that I had a chance either to die peacefully if I would make a supreme effort and let my terror possess me, or I could die in agony if I chose to fight it. Silvio Manuel spoke to me, a thing he rarely did. He said that the energy I needed to accept my terror was in my middle point, and that the only way to succeed was to acquiesce, to surrender without surrendering. The Nahual woman and La Gorda were perfectly calm. I was the only one who was dying there. Silvio Manuel said that the way I was wasting energy, my end was only moments away, and that I should consider myself already dead. Don Juan signaled the Nahual woman and La Gorda to follow him. They turned their backs to me. I did not see what else they did. I felt a powerful vibration go through me. I figured that it was my death rattle. My struggle was over. I did not care anymore. I gave in to the unsurpassable terror that was killing me. My body, or the configuration I regarded as my body, relaxed, abandoned itself to its death. As I let the terror come in, or perhaps go out of me, I felt and saw a tenuous vapor, a whitish smear against the sulfur yellow surroundings, leaving my body. Don Juan came back to my side and examined me with curiosity. Silvio Manuel moved away and grabbed La Gorda again by the nape of her neck. I clearly saw him hurling her like a giant ragdoll into the fog bank. Then he stepped in himself and disappeared. The Nahual woman made a gesture to invite me to come into the fog. I moved toward her, but before I reached her, Don Juan gave me a forceful shove that propelled me through the thick yellow fog. I did not stagger, but glided through and ended up falling headlong onto the ground in the everyday world. La Gorda remembered the whole affair as I narrated it to her. Then she added more details. The Nahual woman and I were not afraid for your life, she said. The Nahual had told us that you had to be forced to give up your holdings, but that was nothing new. Every male warrior has to be forced by fear. Silvio Manuel had already taken me behind that wall 3 times so that I would learn to relax. He said that if you saw me at ease, you would be affected by it, and you were. You gave up and relaxed. Did you also have a hard time learning to relax? I asked. No, it's a cinch for a woman, she said. That's our advantage. The only problem is that we have to be transported through the fog. We can't do it on our own. Why not, Gorda? I asked. One needs to be very heavy to go through, and a woman is light, she said. Too light, in fact. What about the Nahual woman? I didn't see anyone transporting her, I said. The Nahual woman was special, La Gorda said. She could do everything by herself. She could take me in there, or take you. She could even pass through that deserted plain, a thing which the Nahual said was mandatory for all travelers who journey into the unknown. Why did the Nahual woman go in there with me? I asked. Silvio Manuel took us along to buttress you, she said. He thought that you needed the protection of 2 females and 2 males flanking you. Silvio Manuel thought that you needed to be protected from the entities that roam and lurk in there. Allies come from that deserted plain, and other things even more fierce. Were you also protected? I asked. I don't need protection, she said. I'm a woman. I'm free from all that. But we all thought that you were in a terrible fix. You were the Nawal, and a very stupid one. We thought that any of those fierce allies, or if you wish, call them demons, could have blasted you or dismembered you. That was what Silvio Manuel said. He took us to flank your 4 corners. But the funny part was that neither the Nawal nor Silvio Manuel knew that you didn't need us. We were supposed to walk for quite a while until you lost your energy. Then Silvio Manuel was going to frighten you by pointing out the allies to you and beckoning them to come after you. He and the Nawal planned to help you little by little. That is the rule. But something went wrong. The minute you got in there, you went crazy. You hadn't moved an inch, and you were already dying. You were frightened to death, and you hadn't even seen the allies yet. Silvio Manuel told me that he didn't know what to do. So he said in your ear the last thing he was supposed to say to you, to give in, to surrender without surrendering. You became calm at once all by yourself, and they didn't have to do any of the things that they had planned. There was nothing for the Nawal and Silvio Manuel to do except to take us out of there. I told La Gorda that when I found myself back in the world, there was something standing by me. There was someone standing by me who helped me to stand up. That was all I could recollect. We were in Silvio Manuel's house, she said. I can now remember a lot about that house. Something told me, I don't know who, someone told me, I don't know who, that Silvio Manuel found that house and bought it because it was built on a power spot. But someone else said that Silvio Manuel found the house, liked it, bought it, and then brought the power spot to it. I personally feel that Silvio Manuel brought the power. I feel that his impeccability held the power spot on that house for as long as he and his companions lived there. When it was time for them to move away, the power of that spot vanished with them, and the house became what it had been before Silvio Manuel found it, an ordinary house. As La Gorda talked, my mind seemed to clear up further, but not enough to reveal what had happened to us in that house that filled me with such sadness. Without knowing why, I was sure it had to do with the Nawal woman. Where was she? La Gorda did not answer when I asked her that. There was a long silence. She excused herself, saying that she had to make breakfast. It was already morning. She left me by myself with a most painful, heavy heart. I called her back. She got angry and threw her pots on the floor. I understood why. In another session of dreaming together, we went still deeper into the intricacies of the second attention. This took place a few days later. La Gorda and I, with no such expectation or effort, found ourselves standing together. She tried 3 or 4 times in vain to interlock her arm with mine. She spoke to me, but her speech was incomprehensible. I knew, however, that she was saying that we were again in our dreaming bodies. She was cautioning me that all movement should stem from our midsections. As in our last attempt, no dreaming scene presented itself for our examination, but I seemed to recognize a physical locale which I had seen in dreaming nearly every day for over a year. It was the valley of the saber-toothed tiger. We walked a few yards. This time our movements were not jerky or explosive. We actually walked from the belly, with no muscular action involved. The trying part was my lack of practice. It was like the first time I had ridden a bicycle. I easily got tired and lost my rhythm, became hesitant and unsure of myself. We stopped. La Gorda was out of synchronization too. We began then to examine what was around us. Everything had an indisputable reality, at least to the eye. We were in a rugged area with a weird vegetation. I could not identify the strange shrubs I saw. They seemed like small trees, 5 to 6 feet high. They had a few leaves, which were flat and thick, chartreuse in color, and huge, gorgeous, deep brown flowers striped with gold. The stems were not woody, but seemed to be light and pliable, like reeds. They were covered with long, formidable-looking, needle-like thorns. Some old, dead plants that had dried up and fallen to the ground gave me the impression that the stems were hollow. The ground was very dark and seemed moist. I tried to bend over to touch it, but I failed to move. La Gorda signaled me to use my midsection. When I did that, I did not have to bend over to touch the ground. There was something in me like a tentacle which could feel, but I could not tell what I was feeling. There were no particular tactile qualities on which to base distinctions. The ground that I touched appeared to be soil, not to my sense of touch, but to what seemed to be a visual core in me. I was plunged then into an intellectual dilemma. Why would dreaming seem to be the product of my visual faculty? Was it because of the predominance of the visual in daily life? The questions were meaningless. I was in no position to answer them, and all my queries did was to debilitate my second attention. La Gorda jolted me out of my deliberations by ramming me. I experienced a sensation like a blow. A tremor ran through me. She pointed ahead of us. As usual, the saber-toothed tiger was lying on the ledge where I had always seen it. We approached till we were a mere 6 feet from the ledge, and we had to lift our heads to see the tiger. We stopped It stood up. Its size was stupendous, especially its breath. I knew that La Gorda wanted us to sneak around the tiger to the other side of the hill. I wanted to tell her that that might be dangerous, but I could not find a way to convey the message to her. The tiger seemed angry, aroused. It crouched back on its hind legs, as if it were preparing to jump on us. I was terrified. La Gorda turned to me, smiling. I understood that she was telling me not to succumb to my panic, because the tiger was only a ghost-like image. With a movement of her head, she coaxed me to go on. Yet, at an unfathomable level, I knew that the tiger was an entity. Perhaps not in the factual sense of our daily world, but real nonetheless. And because La Gorda and I were dreaming, we had lost our own factuality in the world. At that moment, we were on a par with the tiger. Our existence also was ghost-like. We took one more step at the nagging insistence of La Gorda. The tiger jumped from the ledge. I saw its enormous body hurtling through the air, coming directly at me. I lost the sense that I was dreaming. To me, the tiger was real, and I was going to be ripped apart. A barrage of lights, images, and the most intense primary colors I had ever seen flashed all around me. I woke up in my study. After we became extremely proficient in our dreaming together, I had the certainty then that we had managed to secure our detachment, and we were no longer in a hurry. The outcome of our efforts was not what moved us to act. It was rather an ulterior compulsion that gave us the impetus to act impeccably, without thought of reward. Our subsequent sessions were like the first, except for the speed and ease with which we entered into the second state of dreaming, dynamic vigil. Our proficiency in dreaming together was such that we successfully repeated it every night. Without any such intention on our part, our dreaming together focused itself randomly on 3 areas: on the sand dunes, on the habitat of the saber-toothed tiger, and most important, on forgotten past events. When the scenes that confronted us had to do with forgotten events in which La Gorda and I had played an important role, she had no difficulty in interlocking her arm with mine. That act gave me an irrational sense of security. La Gorda explained that it fulfilled a need to dispel the utter aloneness that the second attention produces. She said that to interlock the arms promoted a mood of objectivity, and as a result, we could watch the activity that took place in every scene. At times, we were compelled to be part of the activity. At other times, we were thoroughly objective and watched the scene as if we were in a movie theater. When we visited the sand dunes, or the habitat of the tiger, we were unable to interlock arms. In those instances, our activity was never the same twice. Our actions were never premeditated. but seemed to be spontaneous reactions to novel situations. According to La Gorda, most of our dreaming together grouped itself into three categories. The first, and by far the largest, was a reenactment of events we had lived together. The second was a review that both of us did of events I alone had lived. The land of the saber-toothed tiger was in this category. The third was an actual visit to a realm that existed as we saw it at the moment of our visit. She contended that those yellow mounds are present here and now, and that is the way they look and stand always to the warrior who journeys into them. I wanted to argue a point with her. She and I had had mysterious interactions with people we had forgotten, for reasons inconceivable to us, but whom we had nonetheless known in fact. The saber-toothed tiger, on the other hand, was a creature of my dreaming. I could not conceive both of them to be in the same category. Before I had time to voice my thoughts, I got her answer. It was as if she were actually inside my mind, reading it like a text. "They are in the same class," she said, and laughed nervously. "We can't explain why we have forgotten, or how it is that we are remembering now. We can't explain anything. The saber-toothed tiger is there, somewhere. We'll never know where. But why should we worry about a made-up inconsistency? To say that one is a fact and the other a dream has no meaning whatever to the other self." La Gorda and I used dreaming together as a means of reaching an unimagined world of hidden memories. Dreaming together enabled us to recollect events that we were incapable of retrieving with our everyday life memory. When we rehashed those events in our waking hours, it triggered yet more detailed recollections. In this fashion, we disinterred, so to speak, masses of memories that had been buried in us. It took us almost 2 years of prodigious effort and concentration to arrive at a modicum of understanding of what had happened to us. Don Juan had told us that human beings are divided in two. The right side, which he called the tonal, encompasses everything the intellect can conceive of. The left side, called the nawal, is a realm of indescribable features, a realm impossible to contain in words. The left side is perhaps comprehended, if comprehension is what takes place, with the total body. Thus, its resistance to conceptualization. Don Juan had also told us that all the faculties, possibilities, and accomplishments of sorcery, from the simplest to the most astounding, are in the human body itself. Taking as a base the concepts that we are divided in two, and that everything is in the body itself, La Gorda proposed an explanation of our memories. She believed that during the years of our association with the Nawal Juan Matus, our time was divided between states of normal awareness on the right side, the tonal, where the first attention prevails, and states of heightened awareness on the left side, the Nahual, or the site of the second attention. La Gorda thought that the Nahual Juan Matis's efforts were to lead us to the other self by means of the self-control of the second attention through dreaming. He put us in direct touch with the second attention, however, through bodily manipulation. La Gorda remembered that he used to force her to go from one side to the other by pushing or massaging her back. She said that sometimes he would even give her a sound blow over or around her right shoulder blade. The result was her entrance into an extraordinary state of clarity. To La Gorda, it seemed that everything in that state went faster, yet nothing in the world had been changed. It was weeks after La Gorda told me this that I remembered the same had been the case with me. At any given time, Don Juan might give me a blow on my back. I always felt the blow on my spine, high between my shoulder blades. An extraordinary clarity would follow. The world was the same, but sharper. Everything stood by itself. It may have been that my reasoning faculties were numbed by Don Juan's blow, thus allowing me to perceive without their intervention. I would stay clear indefinitely or until Don Juan would give me another blow on the same spot to make me revert back to a normal state of awareness. He never pushed or massaged me. It was always a direct, sound blow. Not like the blow of a fist, but rather a smack that took my breath away for an instant. I would have to gasp and take long, fast gulps of air until I could breathe normally again. La Gorda reported the same effect. All the air would be forced out of her lungs by the Nahual's blow, and she would have to breathe extra hard to fill them up again. La Gorda believed that breath was the all-important factor. In her opinion, the gulps of air that she had to take after being struck were what made the difference. Yet she could not explain in what way breathing would affect her perception and awareness. She also said that she was never hit back into normal awareness. She reverted back to it by her own means, though without knowing how. Her remarks seemed relevant to me. As a child, and even as an adult, I had occasionally had the wind knocked out of me when I took a fall on my back. But the effect of Don Juan's blow, though it left me breathless, was not like that at all. There was no pain involved. Instead, it brought on a sensation impossible to describe. The closest I can come is to say that it created a feeling like dryness in me. The blows to my back seemed to dry out my lungs and fog up everything else. Then, as La Gorda had observed, everything that had become hazy after the Nahual's blow became crystal clear as I breathed, as if breath were the catalyst, the all-important factor. The same thing would happen to me on the way back to the awareness of everyday life. The air would be knocked out of me. The world I was watching would become foggy, and then it would clear as I filled up my lungs. Another feature of those states of heightened awareness was the incomparable richness of personal interaction, a richness that our bodies understood as a sensation of speeding. Our back and forth movement between the right and the left sides made it easier for us to realize that on the right side, too much energy and time is consumed in the actions and interactions of our daily life. On the left side, on the other hand, there is an inherent need for economy and speed. La Gorda could not describe what this speed really was, and neither could I. The best I could do would be to say that on the left side, I could grasp the meaning of things with precision and directness. Every facet of activity was free of preliminaries or introductions. I acted and rested. I went forth and retreated without any of the thought processes that are usual to me. This was what La Gorda and I understood as speeding. La Gorda and I discerned at one moment that the richness of our perception on the left side was a post facto realization. Our interaction appeared to be rich in the light of our capacity to remember it. We became cognizant then that in these states of heightened awareness, we had perceived everything in one clump, one bulky mass of inextricable detail. We called this ability to perceive everything at once intensity. For years, we had found it impossible to examine the separate constituent parts of those chunks of experience. We had been unable to synthesize those parts into a sequence that would make sense to the intellect. Since we were incapable of those syntheses, we could not remember. Our incapacity to remember was in reality an incapacity to put the memory of our perception on a linear basis. We could not lay our experiences flat, so to speak, and arrange them in a sequential order. The experiences were available to us, but at the same time, they were impossible to retrieve, for they were blocked by a wall of intensity. The task of remembering, then, was properly the task of joining our left and right sides, of reconciling those two distinct forms of perception into a unified whole. It was the task of consolidating the totality of oneself by rearranging intensity into a linear sequence. It occurred to us that the activities we remembered taking part in might not have taken long to perform in terms of time measured by the clock. By reason of our capacity to perceive in terms of intensity, we may have had only a subliminal sensation of lengthy passages of time. La Gorda felt that if we could rearrange intensity into a linear sequence, we would honestly believe that we had lived 1,000 years. The pragmatic step that Don Juan took to aid our task of remembering was to make us interact with certain people while we were in a state of heightened awareness. He was very careful not to let us see those people when we were in a state of normal awareness. In this way, he created the appropriate conditions for remembering. Upon completing our remembering, La Gorda and I entered into a bizarre state. We had detailed knowledge of social interactions which we had shared with Don Juan and his companions. These were not memories in the sense that I would remember an episode from my childhood. They were more than vivid moment-to-moment recollections of events. We reconstructed conversations that seemed to be reverberating in our ears, as if we were listening to them. Both of us felt that it was superfluous to try to speculate about what was happening to us. What we remembered from the point of view of our experiential selves was taking place now. Such was the character of our remembering. At last, La Gorda and I were able to answer the question that had driven us so hard. We remembered who the Nahual woman was, where she fit among us, what her role had been. We deduced, more than remembered, that we had spent equal amounts of time with Don Juan and Don Gennaro in normal states of awareness, and with Don Juan and his other companions in states of heightened awareness. We recaptured every nuance of those interactions, which had been veiled by intensity. Upon a thoughtful review of what we had found, we realized that we had bridged the two sides of ourselves in a minimal fashion. We turned then to other topics, new questions that had come to take precedence over the old ones. There were 3 subjects, 3 questions that summarized all of our concerns. Who was Don Juan and who were his companions? What had they really done to us? And where had all of them gone?